Welcome to this Focus Lunchbox webinar, How to Unlock the Value of Your ERP. My name is Courtney and I'm your host for today. Joining me is Heather Jones and Renee Dodds as subject matter experts for this webinar series. Over the last few months, Renee and Heather have been running a webinar series to help mid-sized businesses prepare for, select and implement ERP successfully. For this webinar, we'll be focusing on how to get the most out of your ERP system for your business. An ERP system will add immediate value to your business. However, what can be difficult to know is how to develop the software for the long term. Developing a plan or roadmap for your ERP is critical to making the most out of this technology asset. This webinar will cover how to get the most out of your ERP system, as well as working with your partner, leveraging support and when to upgrade. For today's webinar, we are pleased to be able to offer 2 hours of free consultancy time for you or your client's business. So just by attending this webinar, you are in the draw for that. We will draw the winner once this webinar has finished and will notify the winner by email. I would now like to introduce Heather Jones, a Christchurch-based account manager. Over to you, Heather.
Thanks, Courtney. So over the course of the first 3 webinars, we've looked at preparing for an ERP evaluation, choosing the right ERP software and implementation partner, and then how to conduct a successful ERP implementation. This is such a big topic, we've broken it up over 2 webinars. So in the last webinar, we looked at the initial phases of the ERP implementation, which were the solution engagement, planning and organisation, the solution build, and the customization phases. The next phase we come to in the process is the solution delivery phase. Now, on face value, the solution delivery phase would suggest that you hand the keys over to the software and say, here you go. Or perhaps Renee, one of our Christchurch-based software consultants, you can comment on whether it is just a little more complicated than that.
Hello everyone. Well, complicated may not necessarily be the right word, but there are still a couple of things that need to be done first before we hand over the keys. However, we are certainly getting closer. So now we're in the position where the system is set up and configured, and it's now time to get the rest of the team on board. The focus around this phase is to carry out that final testing of the solution, and then, based on the outcomes of that testing, work out it's time to train the rest of the staff that will be using the solution. After that, you then need to review any outstanding issues to determine the impact, and then it's time to make that big decision, are we ready to go live?
Okay, so let's work through those last few items as we're all wanting to get to the go live moment.
So the final testing is fairly self-explanatory, but important nonetheless. Take your time, work through the scenarios you've identified, and ensure that your team of champions are comfortable in how the processing works, how the transactions are ending out in the relevant modules, such as accounts receivable, accounts payable, inventory, and importantly, the GL. It is interesting that even though an ERP system is ultimately a financial management system, I've seen lots of instances where the focus is all on the sub-ledger and the general ledger can at times be forgotten. The general ledger and the way in which the transactions post through is key to the solution and needs to be included in any testing.
Okay, Renee, one of the items we have spoken about in the first 2 webinars was getting everyone on the bus, but that was really in relation to the system champions. What about the rest of the team?
Well, now is really their time to be involved. During the selection and the implementation process, we've said it would be worthwhile keeping them up to date about what is happening. But realistically, up until this stage, for the rest of the staff, there's been limited involvement. But now is the time to get started with them using the new system, training them how it's going to work and what will be their new job using the new solution. One comment I would make would be to not underestimate the impact of change and be prepared to manage it. Change management has its challenges. Every person responds to challenges in a different way.
Indeed they do. And at this point, it is important to have process documentation completed and user acceptance testing signed off for each key area. Ideally, your documentation will cover not just system processes, but all your company processes and be written in your company's own language so that everyone has a complete understanding of the new system and your team is comfortable and confident in how to go about their daily tasks.
Yeah, that's right. It really does make the training so much easier if you have these. So once the staff training has been carried out, you will generally find that there are some queries or issues that have been identified that the consultants need to adjust for. This is where the issues register that we discussed in the last webinar needs to be updated and maintained. As now that we're getting closer to a go live decision, the register needs to be reviewed to establish if there are any key items outstanding that have to be resolved before the company starts using the system.
All right, now that the final testing of the solution, the training of the staff, and the review of the issues register has been completed, are we now at that point of go live?
Well, Heather, we're now at the point where the company needs to decide whether they are ready to go live and start using the new solution. Naturally, this is an important call and it needs to be made by the client project sponsor. Getting it wrong and going live too early may cause issues for the business, but not going live may have other impacts. Like any decision, you need to weigh up the information you have and balance that against any risks and other impacting factors. Talk to your implementation team, get their feedback, review the issues register and the results of the testing. These things will help you make the call as to whether you feel comfortable going live, whether more work needs to be done. And if more work needs to be done, then make sure you document that work and also document any impact that that may have on the scope of the project.
Okay, now with all areas having signed off on user acceptance testing and the go-ahead given from the project sponsors from both parties, can you outline what a customer can expect to happen on Go Live Day?
Sure. So whilst this is a big moment for the business when doing an implementation, really the objective is to make sure this is a bit of a non-event. If the training, testing and documentation have all been done, then ideally it should be a smooth process. The lead consultant should be on site or available to you to help manage any issues that may arise, but ideally these should be minimal. Typically what you tend to find is that there's a bit of resistance to moving to the new system, so people try to do the minimum amount of work to begin with, but then over time that builds up as the necessary processing needs to be carried out.
Okay, Renee, there are some common questions that often come up regarding the approach to going live with a new system, and I'd like to get your comments on them. Firstly, is the financial end of year the best time to go live with a new system?
Well, that's a good question, Heather. So it's a common perception that you need to go live at year end to have a full set of financial year information in one system. However, this is not necessarily the case. The financial year end is a busy time of year preparing year end accounts along with all the budgeting and planning that needs to be done for the new year. So working through an implementation on top of that can quite often not be practical. Go lives can be scheduled for any time of the year as the history can be brought through. However, you always want to make sure that you go live as at month end.
Great. And so secondly, do you often find you need to run the old and the new systems in parallel?
Well, that depends on the testing you've done. To run in parallel means doubling the workload for your staff, and then on top of that, adding more reconciliations to your finance people. Because while the final results should be the same, the breakdown may be different. So my answer would be, if you've tested and done the prep work, then there would be no need to run in parallel.
That makes sense. So what are your thoughts on the feasibility of staggering the go live and introducing only certain elements of the new ERP solution?
So staggering a go live can have merit in some circumstances, but it does add complications around managing the staggered cutoff of data. For example, making sure that the transactions are not duplicated in systems. If you consider staggering the go live, I would generally advise against the staggering being based on modules, such as going live with accounts receivable but not accounts payable. The nature of an integrated system makes it difficult to manage and creates additional reconciliations. If you're going to stagger the go live, then it would be easier to base it on different branches, divisions, or companies in the group. However, staggering the go live should really only be necessary for big companies, as it does add complications which will have impacts on costs. So I would try and avoid it if you can.
Thanks, Renee. So now that we are live and transacting in the new system, are we done? Is that it for the project? Does the partner shake hands, say great job, and head off into the sunset?
No, they're not about to ride off into the sunset. And most importantly, the implementation is not quite complete. There is still the final phase relating to the solution handover.
Okay, can you run through this final phase and what is involved in the solution handover, please?
Sure. So before we get to the handover, let's just talk about that first month post go live. During this period, the partner consultant should be available to you to assist with any issues that arise. They will help you through that first month end, which is generally a crucial stage in the implementation, as it's when you get to see the first set of figures coming out of the system and you get to carry out some processes for the first time, such as customer statements and payment supplier runs. The consultant team needs to ensure that all these processes are working correctly, reconciliations are balanced to validate the posting to the GL, and in general just to ensure that the system is working the way that it is intended. At the same time, after a month of processing, you may identify some changes that need to be made, which could include user security changes, reports or form customization changes, or other configuration alterations that need to be made. It's only once the team have helped you through that first month end and all the work that has been outlined in the scope has been covered off that you would then move into the handover.
So you just mentioned report and form changes. Now, in my opinion, reporting and system outputs are a critical aspect to ensuring a successful deployment. What do you recommend is the best approach in this area?
So this area always seems to be an area of contention. The best approach would be to identify your outputs at the start of the project. So back in that pre-implementation phase when you're working on your scope and your questionnaire, detail in here what items are required for go live. Things like output items, financial reports, sales reports. These will then all be included in your scope of works document and will be completed before you go live. However, it's very hard to scope out all your requirements for reporting up front when you haven't yet used the system or you haven't seen your data working in the system. But all the ERP systems come with an array of inbuilt reports, which you may find provide about 90% of what you require. They may just need a few adjustments, things like maybe the report prints by month and you want it weekly, maybe it prints by primary stock group and you want it to report by secondary stock group. So these are just simple changes. However, lots of simple changes can add up in terms of time and therefore investment. So this is normally the reason why report customizations can be classed as out of scope.
So this would suggest that as long as the key outputs are defined as part of the project and are delivered, it is really the role of the project manager to highlight anything being requested that falls out of scope and therefore may need a variation created if it is deemed to be required at go live. More usually, however, these will be created as a post-implementation task. So assuming we have worked through the first month end, can you now outline what the handover actually involves?
Yeah, so handover is essentially signing off that the implementation is now complete and that the work that has been outlined in the scope document and any change variations have been delivered. Now, ideally, this will be clean cut and easy, but in general, there are always a few overhang items. You inevitably get to the point where the implementation is virtually done, but there may be some bugs that need to be resolved in the software by the vendor or some reports that need to be altered. And again, I encourage you to ensure that the issues register is updated with these items. Now, these items don't mean that you cannot be handed over, but just make sure they're documented.
So who in this handover phase exactly is the client being handed over to?
What the phase implies is that you're moving out of implementation and being handed over to support. Now, different partners manage this in different ways. Some partners have different people managing support and implementations, while others will have the same people doing both the implementation and the support. The bottom line is that as the implementation is over, any work that is now done by the partners team outside of those outstanding items will be charged for in a different way.
Okay, charged for in a different way. Perhaps you can expand on that, please.
Okay, but unfortunately there is no specific rule as different partners provide different options. Some partners will do any ongoing work on a pure time and materials basis, in which case you pay for what you use, while others may offer a support contract. These support contracts may vary depending on a partner, but in general, a support contract allows you to pre-purchase support hours at a discounted rate.
This might be an area of concern for those listening. We have just implemented the solution and already we are talking about the need for support. What should a client expect in terms of their support needs?
Well, once again, there's no specific answer to that, but rather factors that may influence the level of support that you need. Firstly, your support needs will probably be the highest straight after the implementation, and then they will reduce as you and your staff get used to the system. Clients who have only been using their system a couple of months often require assistance for improvement of processes, and then once all those processes are defined, they call on support less and less, We have some clients that we hardly ever hear from a support perspective because they now know their system so well. One suggestion I would make is to ensure that there is only one communication channel between your company and your partner for support issues. If all your staff can contact your partner, you'll end up with a number of duplicate issues being raised and hence additional expense.
So Renee, we've painted quite a rosy picture here, but even with a well-defined implementation methodology and with experienced consultants running the process, do things always go so smoothly?
Unfortunately, no, things don't always go according to plan. And a quick Google search will give you several examples of where ERP implementations went off the rails and ended up costing more than the original estimate, were late in being implemented, or did not deliver what was planned.
And in your experience, Renee, what are the more common scenarios that cause these less than ideal outcomes?
Well, one of the factors that occur frequently comes down to expectation management. As a client, once you're in the thick of the implementation, you realise more and more what an ERP system is capable of. This will fire off new ideas as to what you would like to see included in your solution. Now, this is completely normal and in itself is not a problem, but where it can become a problem is if these new ideas are not reflected in the change to the original scope. An experienced ERP implementer will point out to the customer how these new ideas can potentially be incorporated into the implementation, what impact to the scope will be, what could be in a change to the timeframes, and then most probably a change in the implementation investment. Too often, however, the impact of the change in scope is never explained, and as such, the client is under the expectation that nothing is going to change until the due dates are passed or the budget has run over and the implementation is not complete.
So what you're saying is that it's really the responsibility of the ERP partner to have the discipline to ensure that variations to the scope are captured in an approved variation form?
Yes, and to ensure that these changes are then communicated back to the customer so that both parties can document and sign off on these changes.
So this, of course, all hinges on good communication. Part of my role is sometimes to field calls from clients who are unhappy with the way that their ERP installation is going, and almost always the problem comes down to communication. This usually comes about because assumptions get made by one party or the other, and those assumptions aren't voiced out loud and agreed upon. So then you start to get a divergence of expectation. The only way to combat this is to make sure that the communication lines are open and that each stakeholder in the process is always clear that what is delivered meets the requirements, not only in functionality terms, but also in timeline and cost expectations.
Yeah, absolutely, Heather. And along those lines, another key issue that does come up when an implementation goes off track is not having the right people in the project roles and not doing the necessary meetings that we discussed in that last webinar. If you're having regular project meetings to discuss the progress of the implementation, progress of the budget, any issues that have arisen, any risks, and of course the scope changes that we just spoke about, then this will go a long way to preventing things from going off the rails. And this is also where it is key to have that project sponsor who is not deep in the detail of the work on the project. You need to have someone who sits outside of the day-to-day operations and can cast that objective eye over the progress.
So once an ERP system has been deployed and is live, in terms of going forward, what would we then suggest to be best practice?
Well, we've mentioned numerous times throughout this webinar series about long-term thinking and the importance of a good relationship with your software partner, a relationship that will continue well into the future.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that once the ERP system is installed, then that's only the very start of this relationship.
Yeah, correct. And there are two aspects to this. Firstly, as we all know, software changes. ERP software is constantly being enhanced with new features and functionality being added, which can be beneficial to you as a user. So the one aspect of the ongoing relationship are upgrades to your solution. Secondly, when an ERP solution is installed, it is configured in such a way that it reflects the workflow of the customer at that point in time. But the fact of the matter is that ERP customers, like all businesses, adapt and change. And if they are adapting and changing, then their ERP system will need to adapt and change with them.
So wearing the client's hat for a moment, they might be a bit concerned after having just invested in the new system to now be faced with the prospect of further ongoing investment.
Yeah, and I can understand that, but the point that needs to be realised here is that ultimately an ERP system is a platform for improved productivity. To explain my point, it may be helpful to just introduce a new metaphor, which is that you should look upon your ERP system in the same way you do as one of your best employees. When you have a productive employee, you're happy to spend more time on their training and development and within reason meet their salary demands rather than risk losing them. You're happy to do this because you know there will be a return on that extra investment. And an ERP system should really be viewed in the same way. It is there to help you more readily achieve your business outcomes and therefore should be developed in accordance with whatever business goals you have in mind.
Renee, I think you're picking up on a really important point here, and that is of mindset. At Focus, we're in a unique position where we have a lot of customers who are considering ERP for the first time and who are already using a small business product. As we've highlighted in earlier webinars, these products are a very much what you see is what you get proposition, and there's very little room for customization. And this, of course, comes with a much lower price tag. So naturally, a mindset can develop that you should only pay for a system at the start. But the point that I think you're making here is that this is an inappropriate mindset when it comes to ERP.
Absolutely, it is all about mindset, and I know from past experiences that the successful implementations are where at the start the customer is thinking that the ERP system is the partner system and they are led by the partners team. As they get more familiar with the system, which normally starts to happen after that first month end, then that mindset seems to shift and they start thinking of the ERP system as their ERP system. And it is the empowerment of the staff and their sense of ownership that leads to that positive mindset. And with that more positive mindset comes the desire to keep on wanting to improve the way they do things.
Yes, I think as I mentioned before, in my role it is very important to establish this change of mindset at the start of the sales process, and that moving to a modern ERP system is not a case of install and forget. And certainly this is the key to today's topic, the importance of unlocking the value of your ERP system. Once it is in place, will come down to the ongoing investment that you make. But to bring it down from the philosophical to the practical, from your experience, Renee, what are some of the likely changes that will need to be made to the ERP system as time wears on?
Well, let's just backtrack to the 2 points I raised earlier, specifically product upgrades and clients' companies evolving. We'll start with the product upgrade. So quite simply, no good software is static. Software evolves, which requires your solution to be upgraded. When we talk about upgrades, in general, software vendors have 2 different types of version upgrades, minor upgrades and major upgrades. Minor upgrades generally involve an upgrade to the product to fix a bug in the software. I appreciate that people hear the word bug and shudder, and that there can be a feeling that if the company did their job right, then there would not be any bugs. But the fact is, every piece of software that's ever been written has bugs in it. To combat this, the software vendor will have strategies in place to release versions to resolve these. Major upgrades generally come out less frequently and normally include significant new features and functions within the software.
This discussion around upgrades and bugs is one that does come up from time to time, especially around the costs for installing an upgrade to fix a bug. What has been your experience in this area?
Well, it's an area that does come up in discussion frequently, and depending on the nature of the software you have, upgrades will be managed in different ways. If you have what is traditionally known as an on-premise solution or a desktop solution, which is essentially an application that you run, then usually part of your solution investment is an ongoing annual maintenance fee. This fee goes to the vendor and generally entitles you to receive upgrades to your software. However, it does not cover the cost of installing the upgrade, which is normally done by the partner, and typically there will be a charge for that.
Okay, so how long would a partner generally take when installing an upgrade?
So the length of time it takes to do an upgrade, which of course impacts on the cost of the upgrade, is dependent on several factors. Firstly, whether it is a major or a minor upgrade. Major upgrades, as their name implies, will take longer. Secondly, how long has it been since you last did an upgrade to your solution? The longer you leave it between upgrades, the bigger the change and hence the more complexity in the upgrade. How much customization has been built into your system? And here we're really talking about when new business processes or functionality have been built into your system. And finally, another impacting factor is the size of your system. And we're talking about the number of transactions that have been processed through.
Okay, Renee, you made a point about how long it has been since the last upgrade. Keeping up to date with upgrades is certainly something we recommend. The newer the version of the software, then the happier they are, which makes sense as they're getting the benefit of the new functionality and the enhancements that have been introduced. With regard to upgrades, I often have had clients ask if they can do their own upgrades instead of having the partner do them to try and minimise the cost. What are your thoughts on this, Renee?
Well, I've had that question put to me many times as well. And in short, there's nothing stopping you from doing the upgrades yourself. Always remember it is your software and you're entitled to the upgrade. So yes, technically you could do it, and we do have some clients who have been on a solution for a long time and who are now doing their own minor upgrades. However, I would not recommend that you do your own. And the reason for that is your system is fundamental to your business. So you want to make sure that things do not go wrong during the upgrade. As we've previously mentioned, there are a lot of moving parts to an ERP solution, and some upgrades can be quite technical. So all in all, it's best left to the professionals who are trained to do them, have done many upgrades, and know what to look out for.
Okay, you spoke about on-premise software and upgrades. What other alternatives are available?
So the other alternative is having a cloud-based software as a service solution. In such a scenario, typically the cost for an upgrade are all inbuilt into a recurring subscription, and the upgrade is carried out by the company hosting the solution. So there is far less involvement for you. Generally, for a minor upgrade, you should get a notification to say that your solution will be upgraded, usually overnight, and in the morning you log into the new version. And of course, for a major upgrade, there would be partner consultancy required.
Okay, so let's recap. We have been talking about the ongoing life cycle of your ERP solution, and we have been discussing one of the factors impacting the lifestyle, being upgrades to the solution. You mentioned another factor being the evolution of the client's business. Can you expand on that for us?
Sure. So in the same way that software does not stop changing, neither does the client's business. I come back to the comment that was made earlier. When the solution is first implemented, it is configured in a way to meet the needs of the business then. However, as times change, so those needs change and the solution needs to adapt. We had an implementation where after a couple of years, the client had almost got back to that same frustrated point that led them to implementing an ERP system in the first place, which was because they were inundated with spreadsheets and no one could see a clear picture of what was happening. We implemented an ERP solution which reduced their needs for multiple spreadsheets, and they were then able to get accurate information out of their system to assist with making those informed business decisions. Fast forward a year or two and the business had adapted and changed and branched out into 2 new areas, which is great for the business. However, once again, it became an administrative nightmare. Multiple spreadsheets were created to cover their needs, and they quickly got to the point where they had so many spreadsheets, no one could keep track of what was going on within those new areas of the business. In the end, after having a frustrated conversation with their software partner, and through the addition of a new module that they weren't aware of and some configuration changes, their ERP system was able to cater for these new requirements, and they were once again back on track getting that critical, accurate information out of their system. So the moral of the story is, as we've mentioned several times, talk to your partner. Their job is to stay on track of what is available, what can be done with the software that you have implemented. They already know your business, and so they can help you to ensure you are maximising that return on your investment.
Thanks, Renee. We have spoken about the value you can get out of your ERP by ensuring that you keep up to date with your upgrades so that you benefit from the new features, and about communicating with your partner so that when your business is changing, your ERP software keeps up with that change. Is there anything else you want to bring up, Renee?
Yes, Heather, there's just one other point that we haven't discussed, and that is the importance of the continued investment in your staff. Now, I spoke earlier about the empowerment of staff and their sense of ownership. The more your staff can learn, the more efficiently they can work. A lot of partners offer training workshops on topics like new upgrade features, report writing, or new modules. So I would definitely recommend that you sign your staff up to as much partner software training as you possibly can.
That's a great point. Any software training that you can get your staff on is hugely beneficial to the running of your ERP system. All right, everyone, that brings us to the end of this webinar. To quickly summarise what we've covered, we're saying that there are a number of different phases involved with the successful implementation of an ERP system, and that your ERP implementation partner will be well versed in these phases. If there is a recognition on the part of the customer that they will need to be involved for the entirety of the process, and that communication lines between the customer and the partner need to be open and flowing, then you are unlikely to face a derailed project. But of course, a successfully installed system is only the start of the ERP journey, because now you have a platform for improved productivity in place, and you should continue to invest in that platform. It will continue to help you achieve your desired business outcomes. Whilst Renee and I were putting together this webinar, we realised that we actually have so much content, we do think we could run a further webinar around the power of your ERP. So once your system has gone live, your core processes are running smoothly, your staff are seeing the benefits and getting excited by what the new system now enables them to do, you'll really be ready to harness this new technology and maximise what it brings to your organisation. Moving into the connected world by integrating your system directly with suppliers, customers, websites, freight companies is just the start. Taking data from documents and delivering that information directly into your system, moving away from traditional data entry. Perhaps using powerful business intelligence tools for optimizing inventory, maybe forecasting stock requirements, creating purchase orders. All of this is just the beginning. Extending your business into the field, the factory, or the warehouse using mobile technology is really, for me, where the enterprise capabilities of ERP software shows its true value. So thank you everyone who has joined us in this webinar series. We do hope you have found it interesting and informative. Back to you, Courtney.
Thanks, Heather and Renee. As mentioned earlier, by attending today's webinar, you've gone into the draw for the 2 hours free consultancy time, which we'll draw once this webinar has finished, and we'll contact the winner by email. Feel free to email Heather or Renee if you have any questions, or you can send an email to support@focus.net.nz. Finally, thank you to everyone who has joined us on this ERP journey so far. We look forward to seeing you all at the next one. If you're keen to talk ERP, then please get in touch. We're always happy to talk about how we can help you achieve your desired business outcomes.